This video is brought to you by nobody. Nobody sponsors these videos. I'm never getting a sponsor. Anyway, subscribe to the channel for more comedic content. So I just finished part 5 of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, and I liked it. But I didn't love it. I would still say confidently that part 4 is my favorite part in the series, and I still think I like part 2 more than part 5. I'm a bit on the edge with that take, but I still think I like it more by a decent amount. That's not to say that part 5 is like bad or anything, because I definitely enjoyed myself with Golden Wind more than parts 1 and 3. This is also the fastest I have finished a JoJo's part, as I binged pretty much all of it within a week, so I was definitely enjoying myself while watching. But there are a few key things that hold it back for me a bit that keep me from loving this part as much as I did with part 4. So let's get into it. Let's review Golden Wind. I don't really know how controversial any of my takes for this are going to be, so let's just get them over with and I can see for myself if the JoJo fandom welcomes my opinions with open arms or shuns me for my blasphemy. Now I am recording this coming fresh off of part 5, so these are mostly going to be very quick thoughts even if it's not a quick video. There's a lot to address, but I also haven't digested everything enough to go super in-depth on anything, so I won't be doing that. If you do want a more in-depth video of my thoughts on certain things in part 5, or maybe an update video in the future if my mind does change a bit, let me know in the comments. But besides that, let's get into this review. Now the first thing that I talked about in my part 4 review was the art and animation style, and so I want to address that as well at the start of this video since the art style seems to change within every individual part now. I will say that the character art style for part 5 doesn't appeal to me as much as part 4 does, but that isn't to say it's bad either. It just took a much longer time for me to get used to, especially since it's a lot harder to get used to older characters being seen in this style. I mean, Jojo looked fine since he's pretty fucking beautiful in every part that he's in, but I'll admit that Koichi and Polnareff's appearances weirded me out a little when I saw them, though they aren't in this part for very long, so it doesn't throw me off too much. This style works really well for the newly introduced characters, and I like all of their designs very much. This goes for some of the villains and the main cast. I especially like Mista and Narancha's designs. They look the coolest to me. Some of the designs might be overdoing it a bit, but that's kind of something you just gotta accept with JoJo's, and when you do accept it, you begin to appreciate how unique they are and how their flashy styles actually add to their characters. It's easier to grow more connected to and attached to one of them when you can recognize or be familiar with them so quickly. So for the most part, I still like the art style quite a bit, and I know for a fact that it's a change that was needed because there was no way Giorno or Bruno or any of these characters would look right in part 4 style. As for animation, it's the best it has ever been within this part. There's a lot of scenes and fights that surprisingly move very fluidly, both with the characters and the background. This doesn't even just apply to fights either. It looks really good in more atmospheric and slower shots that don't have much action. The whole line stuff and limited movement still applies at a lot of times, but the animation for the most part is pretty solid. JoJo's isn't really something I need to have be super fluid anyway, so it doesn't bother me that much when it isn't. It is cool to see that some shots just look really beautiful to stare at though, which I can't say for really any other part when it comes to its animation. The Gold Experience Requiem scene, despite the thoughts I will have on it later, is really well done in the anime. It was colorful and trippy as hell, and that's the type of stuff that gets me the most hype when I watch JoJo's, when it's extremely trippy. The soundtrack for this part is also really good. I mean, the soundtrack for every part is great, but this one stands out the most for me. Giorno's theme is the best of any JoJo as per everyone else in the world who has heard all the themes, and besides that, there's some really good music within this season that just sticks with me more than any other original soundtrack from JoJo's. My only nitpick is that it's extremely repetitive. They play Giorno's theme in literally every episode since it's also the theme for every team member, and the melancholic piano and violin music is played during every backstory and sad moment, but I do love how it sounds, so it doesn't bother me. Great music choices, really good soundtrack for this part. Now that everything visually and musically is out of the way, it's time to talk about the actual story, which is where things begin to get a bit shaky, because part 5 seems to have some of the things that I've loved the most about previous JoJo's parts, but also so many things that I've absolutely hated about them too. Let's talk about the characters since that's the easiest. When it comes to the side cast and side villains, they're very strong. They're the strongest aspect of this part and probably the the best out of every other part so far. I liked about 90% of the characters. When it comes to the main characters, every friend of Giorno that we meet is very distinct and likable. They are full of personality. Arancia is childish and fun, Mista is really cool and pretty damn funny as well, Abbacchio is hard-headed and aggressive, and Bruno is their beacon of hope that's brought them all together. They make it perfectly clear that Bruno is the reason that all of them are together, and he works perfectly as a leader for the group. I felt connected to most of them throughout the part, and their deaths actually got to me, and they made me feel some real emotions, because I wasn't really expecting most of them. It's hard to pick a favorite out of them, because once again, most of them are so fun. I might say Bruno, but another part of me is leaning towards Mista. The only thing that irks me about Mista is that there's really no reason at all why he should even be alive. He gets shot in the head, and in many other vital areas like 100 times in this part, and I know shit like that is kinda just whatever for Jojo characters, but it starts to get ridiculous at a point. But this doesn't ruin him for me, because even though he shouldn't really be alive, he manages to stay useful and integral to the plot until the very end. So the moments where he probably should have died don't really feel like wasted opportunities, especially since he benefits a lot more from being in the story for so long. A lot of the most interesting episodes involve him as well, so if you get rid of him, you get rid of like part of the whole charm of this part. I like Trish too, I almost forgot about her, the boss's daughter. She was very interesting and began to feel like a real member of the team as time went on, and she really grew on me. Abbacchio has one of the best character conclusions I've ever seen in JoJo's, and his death was the closest I had gotten to being emotional over this series. He is a great character. He was more short-lived than the other ones, but still great nonetheless. He made the most of his screen time, even if there's a certain thing that I wish had more growth, but I'll get to that later. The only side member that raises my eyebrow is Fugo, because as a character, he's kinda horseshit. He leaves the story about halfway into it and is maybe mentioned once since then, and then is never brought up again. When a character leaves because of conflicting ideals, typically you expect them to come back and save the day with their mind made up, or come back as an enemy, but he just stays gone. The thing is, Araki actually was planning on bringing him back as a villain and then killing him off, but he didn't because he was depressed. And so I'm not going to be a total jackass about it and act like he should have just went with it anyways, because that's very insensitive, and it's just wrong to say. When it comes to mangaka and just people in general, your health comes first, both mentally and physically, and so I hope Araki's doing a lot better. That doesn't really save Fugo for me, so it still kinda hits my enjoyment even if I can give it a bit of a pass. Aside from him though, the main cast is all pretty good. Polnareff comes back, which was awesome since he's my favorite character aside from Joseph, and while his presence was pretty underwhelming and written very strangely, it's nice to at least see him again, even though they did him really damn dirty. The side villains are really good too for the most part. A lot of JoJo villains that aren't main bad guys are pretty forgettable, but this isn't really the case in this part. They're all pretty damn fun, especially Giacchio, if I'm pronouncing that right. He's my favorite one. Him and Pesci are actually so entertaining that it's funny. Yeah, these ugly motherfuckers are unironically some of the best JoJo side villains. Their personalities are just as exaggerated and fun as the main cast, and their abilities are really cool too. Anyone with ice powers has my bias on their side. Hell, even the main hitman, Risotto, is pretty cool, and when we do see him fight, the fight is actually pretty intimidating for both characters involved. He got done dirty too, but you know what? It serves him right. Before I continue on with the characters, I want to talk about the abilities and fights. Part 5 isn't as creative when it comes to the abilities as Part 4 is, but it's way more action-packed and the action is a lot more appealing to watch. The fights actually feel like fights for the most part, and the abilities of these characters are put to full use. When it comes to stands in this part, I think they are utilized the best out of any JoJo parts. Bruno's stand is probably my favorite, which might sound weird because it's mostly ass as a power, and yet he utilizes it in such a creative way that it gives him the advantage over his opponents, which is probably why I like it so much. I like characters who have really mediocre abilities and yet still find a great use for them to make them strong. His and Mista's fights are really fun. Mista mostly just because he has a goddamn gun with his bullets having personalities, and I mean, hey, gunfights are always cool. That's right, children, gunfighting is awesome. So go shoot your friends. And now my video is demonetized, so I hope you're all having a great afternoon. And now that I got all of that out of the way, you guys might notice that there are a few integral things that I did not mention within this video yet that are incredibly important to the story. And that's Giorno, the main character, Diavolo, the main villain, and the climax and ending. And that is because I don't really like any of these three things that much at all. This is gonna be the most difficult part of this video, I already know. A lot of people really love Giorno, but a lot of people also really hate Giorno. And after watching part 5, I don't really know where I stand with him. You see, when it comes to Giorno, I think there's a lot of interesting ideas with him, but I don't really think he hits the mark on all of them. He has a very interesting dynamic with the rest of his group, like he brings the best out of all of them and they kind of bring the best out of him too. And overall, I think their relationships with each other are very unique compared to the rest of JoJo's, but I still think I prefer Josuke's dynamic with everybody. And even though he brings out the best in his teammates, you don't really feel what they bring out of him nearly as much, which kind of makes him a bit underwhelming in terms of actual character. His bloodline is a very interesting plot point, but outside of a few subtle parallels, it's not really explored all that much, which is kind of a wasted opportunity to me, especially since, well, spoiler alert, I have already finished Stone Ocean and it feels like they talk about those parallels more in that part than they do in this part. His personality resembles Jonathan a lot more than the previous JoJo's, and while there's clear reasons as to why that's the case, it doesn't really connect with me personally because Jonathan was already pretty flat to me. Giorno is better than Jonathan, like a lot better, but there are times in the story where he kind of feels like he's just there to be there. Bruno is also just as much of the main character as he is, so it does kind of take away from him when the secondary main character is the more interesting one. And this isn't to say that I hate Giorno because I still like him, but he's definitely not making my top favorite JoJo's list anytime soon. He just doesn't really do it for me. I do see the appeal to him, but I personally can't go with it. He's not my least favorite JoJo, and he's not my least favorite character in the part. Hell, I still like Giorno, but I'm just not that into him. And that's really all I can say about him. When it comes to Diavolo, I don't really have much to say. He's just not that intriguing to me. I thought the Doppio stuff was pretty interesting, but then that gets thrown away like right before the climax even happens, which I kind of understand it, but at the same time, when you get rid of the main villain's thing that makes them the most interesting, it's not exactly going to tickle me pink. He does have some menacing moments, but when the shock value wears off, you kind of begin to see the cracks in him. His stand is cool, I'll say that. I don't think Araki has missed when it comes to a villain's ability or their design, but just speaking in terms of character and villainy, Diavolo doesn't really have anything that makes him any special compared to other JoJo villains, so he might be my least favorite so far. But once again, I don't hate him. I still think he fits in very well as a main antagonist, and he's still better than a lot of main antagonists in shonen, so it's not saying much for me to say he's my least favorite when I still have liked most of the main villains in JoJo so far. The worst main villain in JoJo is still a lot better than the best main villain in a lot of other series. The climax as well I have some issues with. I thought the GER reveal was cool and trippy as hell, and as you know, I really love trippy stuff, I love weird stuff, so I thought it worked for me, at least. It was kind of convenient, but you know, I still kind of liked it. But regardless of that, the overall climax just felt kind of convoluted and really underwhelming. It's really all over the place and relies a lot on plot convenience. Polnareff's involvement alone adds for a lot of the issues in the final arc, and I fucking love Polnareff. I do get the thematic weight that it holds, but for the most part, I don't really think it hits the mark for me. It might be my least favorite JoJo finale of them all so far. In fact, I definitely say it is. But even with all that being said, I do still like part 5 a great deal. Even though Giorno isn't the best main character in my opinion, there is so much screen time devoted to the side cast who are all so fun and quirky and unique, and it makes this part feel a bit special to me in that way. And even though I don't like Diavolo that much, the villains prior to him are so much fun to be around. And even though I thought the climax was a bit disappointing, I still like it a decent amount. Like, it's not a bad ending or anything, it's just not my favorite in the series. So that being said, I still very much enjoyed part 5, I enjoyed my time with it, I think it's fun, I think it has great action, a pretty solid story despite some cracks in it that I have, and has some pretty cool callbacks to previous parts as well. So with that being said, I'm gonna give Golden Wind a 8.5 out of 10. I liked it a lot. Not as much as part 4, but I still enjoyed it pretty well. So with all that being said, I'll see you guys next time. I will review Stone Ocean soon. I don't know when I'm gonna make the video, but I promise I will make the review soon. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.